This is a reading from the Notebooks by Maria Valtorta, 1943, September 25th. Jesus says, "To speak to you who are unmarried on this topic may cause you amazement, but you are only a spokesman, and thus must subject yourself to conveying anything whatsoever. What I will now say is of use to others. It is useful to correct one error and several more which are increasingly rooted in the world. The world is divided into two major categories. The first, which is enormous, involves those without any scruples at all, either human or spiritual. The second involves the scrupulous, but is however subdivided into two other kinds, those rightly scrupulous and the meanly scrupulous. Marriage is not censured by God to the extent that I have made it a sacrament, and here I am not speaking either about marriage as a sacrament, but about marriage as union, as God the Creator made it by creating male and female, so that they would join, forming one single flesh, which, once it is united, no human force can separate, or should separate. On seeing your hardness of heart, ever greater hardness, I changed the precept of Moses, replacing it with the sacrament. The aim of my act was to give an aid to your souls as spouses against your carnality as animals, and to check upon your illicit facility in repudiating what you formerly chose so as to pass on to new, illicit spouses, to the detriment of your souls and the souls of your children. Whoever is scandalized by a law created by God to perpetuate the miracle of creation is greatly mistaken, and these are generally not the most chaste, but the most hypocritical. For the chaste in marriage see only the sanctity of the goal, whereas the others think of the materiality of the act, like those who with blameworthy irresponsibility think that with impunity they can get over my prohibition of moving on to new loves when the first one has not been dissolved by death. Adulterous and accursed are those living beings who break a union which was formerly willed out of a caprice of the flesh or moral intolerance. For if he or she says a spouse has now become a motive for feeling a burden and a repugnance, I say that God has given man reflection and intellect so that he will use them, and use them all the more in cases of grave import, as is the formation of a new family. I again say that if one has at first erred out of a thoughtlessness or calculation, one must then bear the consequences so as not to create greater catastrophes, which fall upon the better spouse and the innocent children, led to suffer more than life entails, and to judge those whom I have rendered unjudgeable by a precept, the father and the mother. Finally, I say that the power of the sacrament, if you were real Christians, and not the spurious ones you are, ought to act in you, spouses, to make you a single soul that loves itself in a single flesh, and not two beasts hating each other, bound to a single chain. Adulterous and accursed are those living beings who with obscene deceitfulness have two or more conjugal lives, and return to the other mate and their children with the fever of sin in their blood and the smell of vice on their lying lips. Nothing makes it licit for you to be adulterous, nothing, neither the abandonment or illness of a spouse, and much less his or her more or less hateful character. Most of the time, it is your being lustful which makes you see your companion as hateful. You want to see him or her that way to justify to yourselves your shameful actions, which conscience reproaches you for. I said, and I won't change my words, that not only those consummating adultery are adulterers, but those wishing to consummate it in their hearts, because with sensual hunger they look at the man or woman who is not theirs. I said, and I won't change my words, that those who by their way of acting place a spouse in a position to become, in turn, adulterous, are adulterers. Adulterous twice over, they shall answer for their lost souls, and for the soul they have led to be lost by their indifference, neglect, boorishness, and infidelity. God's curse looms over all of them, and don't think this is just a way of speaking. The world is splitting into ruin, because families, first of all, have been ruined. The rivers of blood submerging you had its dikes crumbled by your individual vices, which have spurred more or less great leaders, from the heads of state to the heads of villages, to be thieves, and overbearing so as to have money and distinction for their lusts. Look at the story of the world. It is full of examples. Lust is always in the triple combination which provokes the appearance of your ruins. Whole nations have been destroyed, nations torn away from the church, fissures lasting centuries created for the scandal and torment of races because of the carnal hunger of rulers. And it is logical that it should be that way. Lust extinguishes the light of the Spirit and kills grace. Without grace and without life and without light, you do not differ from the beasts, and thus perform beastly actions. Go ahead and do this, if that's what you like. But remember, O depraved ones, who profane homes and children's hearts with your sinning, that I see and remember and await you. In the look of your God, who loved children and created the family for them, you will see a light which you would not like to see, and which will strike you down.